So, hello guys and girls and whatever. Today we are back for a space regarding mostly the backdraft of the Kursk invasion and the start of dwindling into the patience of the Western allies when it comes to Zelensky itself. Um, this comes after a couple of things that happened the last 2 weeks. I already made a small thread about that. I'm going to link it on the comments so you can, go back at it. But basically, the last 2 weeks have seen three things. First of all, the Russians finally have started a combing operation on the most critical areas of their front. So basically, once Kornevo was done, the point was to start giving a breather to the Russian troops that are interdicted by the same for the moment. There are new pontoons that have been drawn upon the River Seine, so that's not much of a problem as it is right now. The biggest issue is that once that have stalled your enemy, the point is not to let him start to think of ways to make your life more miserable. And well, the counteroffensive was logical, as I said since the beginning, and we have the receipts for that. Once the Ukrainians failed at Korenovo, they could not march forward towards the Rilsk or Lvov. Those two axes being, as I said, this highway that cuts the southern Kursk Oblast from the Ukrainian border towards Glushkovo, towards Kurchatov and Kursk. Once you fail there, you're fucked. And I think that highway was the first line of contact that Ukrainians want to draw, because it gives them, first of all, a rather large piece of the Kursk Oblast, still very minor. Kursk Oblast is roughly 29,000 to 29,500 square kilometers, and the area that the Ukrainians could have occupied if they had managed to go as far would have been roughly 3.6 to 4,000 square kilometers. So roughly 1.5% of the area that they control really right now would have been about 15%, 13% of the Kursk Oblast. So that was what we think the plan was. Kurchatov itself being occupied and so on, they just didn't have the troops that we're seeing right now. That's the biggest problem that Ukrainians have, is that they have advanced far enough to be able to control the area, but within a month they were starting to have back and forth, getting ambushed and getting pushed away from salient positions. One of them was just next to Alexandrovka, where we saw the VAB and the Tunguska getting hit 3 weeks ago. I already had surmised back then that the units were fucked up and they had abandoned their vehicles. And we had the demonstration by the 810th yesterday. Probably it happened 2 days ago. That had captured the Tunguska in question. Probably VAB was torched, and probably they also showed a couple of POWs. Anyway, that's just points out to us being in the right and seeing through the whole maneuver itself. Now, the problem that happened is that they started another movement. This one from Volfino towards basically the Grushkovy district. So Volfino towards 10th of October and Tetkino, and also another movement from Pavlovka towards Veseloe or Bukovka, and then also with a small jab towards Sergeyevka. From the beginning, we had the same approach, and the Warren course had also the same approach. So basically, without any kind of geolocations, without any kind of proof, any kind of evidence, they started by putting multiple villages under control. The difference between this attack and the attack of the 6th of August is pretty simple. The reach is completely different. The amount of troops is also rather small, but you'd say it's a small salient, so they don't want to do much damage. What they want is to apparently clear the troops that are quote unquote trapped by the same river. Problem is, once again, there was never a real Kotel, and the Russians made sure that it would never happen, given that they liberated Snagost, they pushed toward Apasanovka. And then now more recently we see that they advanced probably over 12 kilometers from west to southeast in the area of Korenovo, which means that the buffer area that they needed to evacuate the troops, if so be it, or resupply them on the lateral is still there. Now, the other big problem that we're seeing on the Ukrainian side with these probing attacks, let's call them that, is that they are marking the same level of degradation of forces that we saw in Rabotine last year. Last year, one of the things that we saw is that they started pretty strong. They got their teeth kicked in. Then they observed a small pause of a couple of days. And then we started with another movement. They got their teeth again kicked in. And then the pause between the first and second movement was maybe 2-3 days. Pause between the second and third movement started to be a week. And I mean, we can go back a year because a couple of the assholes from NAFO side have the receipts on those. You can see the devastation that started to get more complete, but also more and more longer to prepare. And one of the things that we had in Robotine is that there was still advancement of the Ukrainian forces. They pushed the Russians slowly out while also wearing themselves down. Here it's completely different. What we are seeing is that they tried a quick push towards Ovukova and Veseloy. It didn't work. A couple of their vehicles were damaged by the minefields, others were probably damaged by the combat. We saw at least 2 strikers getting blown up, at least 1 tank, 1 IMR, 2 other MRAPs or 3 other MRAPs. So in total, you could see that the first attack was costly, not because everybody was killed or every vehicle was destroyed, but because the first party of attacking and breaching the border was really small. My opinion in that, and why I think we think with the group, is that just a couple of days before this shit show started to happen, Pavlovka was bombed by the Russians, by UNPKs. We surmised that there was some damage there, and then they had to push the date of intervention forward, because if the more they would stay in the village, the more they would be actually bombed by the Russians. So that would what explains the smaller and smaller groups. This has to do with Russian ISR in the area, and also the fact that there is no cover for them. If you see the vehicles that got fucked around the northern Medveje area and the southern Vestelo area, they do not have canopies like before. Same for the 2 strikers that were locked up and they were destroyed, one on the field, another on a bend. They do not have the canopies on them. These forces actually were probably pulled hastily from somewhere else, or were part of the reserve that should have intervened further down Kursk, so around the Suja area, and they just were meant to literally work. But as G pointed out on a post related to the one of the tanks, one of the T-72s that got blown up by the new Russian FPVs, it's the exact same Rambat, so basically the external superstructure where they put their K1s, and the exact same form that the 22nd brigade used for its bullshit shenanigans in Zaporozhye area last year. So once again, it could be that it's a model, and it's true that it seems that the Ukrainians have gone with something more serialized. with these rambats around the T-72s, but also with a camping tent canopy cope cage, because we saw them also starting to pop out on the Bradleys. I would have a small word about that later on the space, because I think it's the worst abomination I've ever seen. It gives such a huge silhouette, and it allows the Russians, especially when using FPVs, and in the case of the optical fiber FPVs that the Russians are using now, it makes it absolutely useless. Having the canopy or not having the canopy worked because they used a cover 2, as I call it, electronic warfare. But with a optical link, it simply doesn't work, because there is no frequency to jam, given that this optical fiber, this fine thread that is between the FPV and the controller, that actually allows the transfer of data and transfer of feed. So I think the Ukrainians now are starting, especially in the Kursk area, to see that, okay, most of our electronic warfare has been simply nullified by the optical fiber, and most of the standard protection, so basically the canopy, is useless because it worked in combination with the electronic warfare. So basically you had your FPV, its frequencies were jammed, so from about 20 to 10 meters towards the objective, you had a problem to see where the target was. So if it was in movement, you could absolutely miss it. But now with the optical FPV, you don't care. The images are so pure, so crystalline, so you see exactly what you want to hit. You have no jamming into the controls, and you have no jamming on your feed, which means that you can do maneuvers on a dime, you can attack the area of the tank you want exactly, and therefore in this attack that we saw of the tanks around the area of Medvedev, the tank hit exactly between the fuel reservoir, and the jet would go straight to the engine, basically killing the tank, if not blowing it up, if the ammunition fuel tanks that are just in the back of the fighting compartment of T-72 were to go off. Now, these are small details you don't need to know. It doesn't make sense. The point is that with the new FPVs, the Russians have completely rendered these cages obsolete, and I think the Ukrainians understood it as well. That's why you don't see the cages up, contrarily to what you saw about 40 days ago, when everybody had these stupid cages and they were super proud of that bullshit. Anyway, so basically what we're seeing, Kursk, is that the Russians got the memo, are flushing them out, so the Ukrainians are forced to, force their quote-unquote pass in Glushkovo, and this leads us to the secondary problem, which is how much effective are you going to be if you send about 5 to 6 vehicles, 2 or 3 of them get taken out, you are starting to bomb Obukovo and Veseloe, but it doesn't change much compared to what you did in August, when they literally roamed free for at least a week or two. And as I said, you check just the geolocated advances, quote unquote, that you can see in the map on that area. First of all, even Cope State thinks that it's extremely small, so about 40 kilometers of area of push. Second of all, there are no geolocation of them taking the Siloa, there are no geolocation of them taking the Dvizhe, there is no geolocation of them taking anything at this point. The only thing that happens is that they breach the passages around Novi Put, they cut through the fields, they attack a couple of positions around the tree lines, get attacked, and it cuts there. And one thing to know when Ukrainians are lying is that they start yapping and inventing shit. Remember that before this, they said I had trapped in a boiler about 3,000 troops and 3,000 Russian troops between their defensive lines and the same behind them. And they said, oh, we're going to destroy everything, and they're not going to have any way to go outside this cauldron, and we're going to make a lot of hostages and going to get a lot of equipment as Lend-Lease. This thing was announced about 18 days ago. One of the things that I said that if this shit was true, they would have started clearing the Glushkovsky district straight out of the bat. The moment they blew the whole bridges, they would have gone for it. Because that's when the Russians would have the least equipment available to resist, the least supplies. You are also in this state of panic where suddenly your bridges behind you are blocked. You are having all this fucking armada coming at you. You saw what they did in neighboring Suja, and you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna have 2 brigades on me. I have a really tight stripe of land. They're gonna be like maybe 500 people in total defending themselves over there. And the Russians should have started to immediately think, we need to get the fuck out. And what did the Russians do? Jack shit. They didn't start panicking. First thing they did, we're gonna fucking put the pontoons on. Every single voencourse, every motherfucker, every pidor, be that Dva pidor, be that Romanov, be that Podoliaka, be that even some quote unquote more calm minds just started to panic and say, oh, this is gonna be a big, huge problem for us. Russians didn't give a fuck. The Russian command just said, guys, you're gonna fucking lapin your shit in and you're gonna start pontooning. And that's what they did. They put at least 7 pontoons in total. They lost probably 4 out of them. And they started to use 2 bridges that weren't completely destroyed. One was finished off in Zvanoe. But they did everything they could to first get the guys supplied, pull out whatever civilians they could pull out of there, and make sure that the lifeline around Korenovo and Krasno-Optersky was cleared up. So basically, Red October, a Korenovo village, and a push towards Nagost would have opened a small gap for the Russians to evacuate in case of the pressure was too big, or resupply in case the pressure wasn't coming. And the one cardinal mistake that the Ukrainians did, and everybody said that they're doing this in order to force the Russians to fumble again more troops, a bit like Lapin in Kharkov, and go after them and start capturing shit. This never happened. And you can see multiple things. The fighting in Teotkino, the fighting around Veseloe is fierce. They literally had to bring in at least one Su-27 to drop GBUs on the Palace of Sport of that village. They had huge issues with their own vehicles. I told you we saw at least one ambush around Medvedev of a tank and a senator. The Ukrainian reserves for this operation are running low, mostly because they failed to do what they needed to do on the general axis. The axis to Arsuta was the most beneficial to them, as I said, because it's fucking empty. You just get 3 main roads, a couple of villages, about 20 of them, with a big, I'd say, village/urban settlement type, like Suja, with its surrounding neighborhoods. It's 10,000 people, surrounded by a couple of dozen villages with 200, 300, 400. So bypassing these villages and making them absolutely undefensible for the Russians is pretty easy actually for the Ukrainians. And with the panic settling in, with a competent execution of the road interdiction, they could have gone pretty far. And that's what they did actually. They went the furthest possible that the Russians allowed them within the panic. The problem is that this is completely different now. Russians have their attention in the Kursk area, as it was confirmed by a lot of people right now. They are not committing an actual true counteroffensive in the area. They are just opportunistically taking out the Ukrainians where the Ukrainians cannot defend themselves. And we are seeing this when we see the strikes they are doing. I pointed out already on the map that suddenly you have Orions striking tanks just east of Lyubomivka. And lo and behold, the attack literally advanced to Lyubomivka. People say it was taken, Ukrainians said half of it is taken. Doesn't really matter. That's what I wanted to show you, that the moment the Russians are going to put the pressure properly in Kursk, the advance or the counter-offensive that they're going to put is going to gain a lot of ground. Even Kopstate was forced to admit about 100 square kilometers were lost since allegedly the counter started the 10th. Now, the problem with Kursk itself is that the Russians have chosen exactly the option that we at the Timor Criminal thought. They're just gonna let the fucking Ukrainians waste themselves, and the moment they're gonna be weak enough, they're just gonna enter inside, kill everybody, capture everybody. They're gonna be lost, of course, because it's an offensive or counter-offensive operation, but it's gonna work. There's not gonna be a back and forth push like we had in certain areas of the Avdiivka/Pokrovsk advance, when they had Svatovo, then they lost Svatovo, then advanced to Berdishi, then they lost Berdishi, then take Berdishi again, Umanske, all this bullshit that happened there in defending these small villages. This doesn't happen in Kursk because the Ukrainians themselves know that it serves no purpose to start and holding these smaller areas when the Russians are just going to pin them down and bomb them up. Now, there comes the following point I want to make. We are seeing more and more people, and guys at Blackbird Group, John Helin, if you want to check it, is being extremely sarcastic and mocking of why the Ukrainians suddenly have no problem with mobilization, but do not put people, mobilize people like the Russians did in 2022 to stop the Russian advance, although the Russian advance in 2024 is a lot slower, but a lot more dangerous for the Ukrainians than what happened to the Russians in 2022 around Izium and the Kharkov area. And it's not the only point. A lot of people are saying the attrition war does not work for Ukraine as it stands right now. First of all, because it forces Ukraine to play along the rules set by the Russians, which is, I'm putting a soldier, you're going to have to put a soldier. I'm putting two, you're going to have to put two. And this is for the whole length of the front. And of course, with FPVs, with contactless technologies, with a better command and control, with a better ISR, with the means to harass the Russians when they cannot do that. As I said, for instance, Russians seldom use Baba Yagas, but Ukrainians do, because they have access to a spoofed Starlink network, so they don't have the problems that Russians are starting to have right now with the toss of Starlink, which is 90 days outside of your country, which means that you are actually abusing the toss. But that's not as much a problem as first it might seem, because the Russians are replicating with the same rules of the attrition, which is because you are less than us, when you kill 5 of us, it's not a problem if we kill 5 of you. Attrition doesn't work well with people who are largely unequal. And that's why the Ukrainians are starting to slowly realize that even the move at Kursk that supposedly was to pull people out of the Pokrovsk area and send them to Kursk was a failure. And it wasn't a failure because Ukrainians are stupid, they cannot fight, or they are not well organized. Those points can stand up to a certain level. The failure was that Ukrainians do not have the same amount of people to shuffle around. When the Ukrainians went to Kursk, as I said, it seems that our analysis for this shit show was the most correct. The whole force was about 7.5k people, and he kept yapping about those 3 or 4 brigades that were supposed to be properly or improperly equipped, which, of course, they started to split up with a Panzerfaust, let's call it like this, or a Kampfgruppe Pieper. These guys were to have the most equipment. They were also the strongest, because if you see what is getting killed right now, it's mostly strikers and what the Russians call VVM, which is MRAPs and armored vehicles, armored cars. But now we're seeing this that the CV-90 is attempted to be used in the Medvedev or Vesteloy area. We are seeing also Leopard 1s going there. The disparity of this equipment, the disparity, as I said, of the whole bunch of people that was put together, and once again, I'm going to post what John Helin said because it's extremely funny. It seems that a lot of people now are starting to realize the absolute shit show. In case of John Helin and a lot of people at Blackbird, I'm not going to applaud them, but I'm going to say that these people are not stupid, you know? They can see something, but I think that for a lot of us, when we are partisan to a cause or to a side, we are going to have this tendency of hoping for the best. Let's say it like this. So when I sometimes, feel like I'm defending stupid Russian decisions, maybe that is the same thing as well. But in case of Blackbird Group, in case of the Finns, they rapidly analyzed and said, okay, there is a lot of shit show that might happen, and they didn't say that's going to happen. They kept that, I'd say, conclusion for themselves because they didn't want to start get singled out. But from the beginning, one of the guys of the group literally went on the same conclusion that we gave before even started, that Zelensky was in the shit. He was losing Donetsk. He still is. And he had to do something. I harped about something to happen before the end of September, beginning of September, because otherwise it would have sealed completely Pokrovsk. And hold the behold, they did it. They did it in Kursk. I was expecting, if you have followed the spaces, something around the year of Liman or Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, which would have been a lot more panicky for the Russians because it would have hit completely their rear straight to Lugansk. Although in the larger scheme of things, it would have been a lot more destructive for the Ukrainians because they would have to push towards the most defended heartland of the Russian military and I'd say the Republic's military. But once again, this is not important. What was important is that we knew that something had to happen. They had to break pattern because otherwise they were fucked. Now, they chose the worst and the most stupid mistake for reasons that themselves they are selling right now, that it was for PR. It literally boiled down to PR with some potential alleviation of the situation in Pokrovsk by trying to pull out troops from that direction towards Kursk. The issue, and we go back to what I said, the issue with this is that it would have mattered and would have been a little bit more logical to have done this somewhere when you could support that group. And it's true that at the beginning, it made sense to have everybody in Sumy use the forest canopy, attack this area that was difficult to defend for the Russians, as I said, because the Ukrainians were going to come from the heights. But soon enough, they would have gone into the hard reality of the fact that the Russians can still shuffle around enough troops without depleting one of the main directions where they attack. The biggest problem, and I say that on that thread, I'm going to relink it again, is not that the Russians can grab troops, grab people, and send them to die. No, the biggest problem is that the Russians can maintain multiple axes of offensive while also defending in Kursk. And in the beginning, it was tentative. In the beginning, I know that a lot of people weren't having a lot of belief in Team War Criminals analysis because it really looked like the Ukrainians were having a ball. But soon enough, as we explained to you guys, as we laid it out, the problem for Ukrainians is that they don't have logistics. And there is a example of this, and this example shows exactly two of the main issues with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians cannot fucking spend a single moment without bragging, but at the same time, when they brag about something, they show exactly what the fucking problem is. So there is a recent video that was published by an artillery group, when you see them allegedly using a Lotobingo, so the M777 howitzer, 155mm howitzer, and it looks nice and everything. But once you get further into that footage, you see that it's true that they start with a French TRM 10,000 truck pulling a 777, but half of the footage is them using D30s. Why? Because probably there are splits of this unit for at least a year and a half, and initially they started with 777, but now they are forced to do with D30s. And this development was already mentioned by pro-NATO people and pro-NAFO people before us. There is a Polish reporter who keeps going with these artillery units, And he learns every time that they're losing these 777s or whatever Western shit they get, and are forced to use Soviet shit, not because it's better or because it's sturdier, but simply it's what they can get quick enough. So the problem with Ukrainians in Kursk is just the same as it was illustrated like this. They wanted to do something, they tried to do something, but soon enough they just didn't have the blood for it. They didn't have the fat for it. They were just skin and bones. So the moment they lost their skin, which were all these losses in the first 3 to 4 weeks, it was over. They will have to start pulling resources from other fronts. And let's be honest, I mean, our internal count is over 220 vehicles in total, so civilian and non-civilian. But even if you go to lost armor, you're going to be 140 actual armored vehicle lost. And as I said, just compare it with the account of Nalsio in Robotina, you're going to see that it's the same fucking problem. You are at the same level. Kursk is cosplaying Robotina in a way worse environment because in Robotina, at least, they advance, to a certain point that would make sense for them. But in Kursk, even if you advance 30 kilometers, where are you going to go? Russia, I mean, Kursk Oblast is not the biggest, actually, one of the smallest oblasts, but Russia is 17 fucking million square kilometers. So then what? And once again, the PR element of this that I personally was rejecting initially cannot be rejected now because they literally are milking this. Zelensky goes on live and say, first of all, it was time to reverse the narrative. And you're like, what narrative? What is the narrative? That Ukraine can do something, so give us the weapons so we can do this? But that's not the point, because you are not supposed to do this in Kursk. Whatever you try to do, it's like, it's like a football team saying that we're not washed up because we can beat a amateur team. Or we can, score 20 goals while we're training. That's not the point. The training shit and the actual match are two different things. So you going to Kursk because it's easier doesn't mean that you're going to do the same thing in Zaporozhye, in Donbass, or in Lugansk. And the whole narrative of this, that, see, we can do wonders if we get the weapons, we can push and bring the war to the Russians. No, you can't. That's the whole fucking problem. While you were busy in Kursk, Russians were busy in Donetsk and in parts of Lugansk. The whole logic here is to analyze it properly, and it's true that Kursk, maybe it's a bit embarrassing for the Russians if the Russians would give a fuck. But we know right now the Russians do not give a fuck. They are into this to end it. How they're going to end it, that's different. And I agree that for a lot of people, it looks like it's like a glorified stalemate when both sides is going to take maybe 2,000, 3,000 square kilometers per year, which puts basically the whole conquest of Ukraine as it stands over 150 years. But that's not the point, because the real issue for Ukrainians right now is their attrition going absolutely bonkers. We are into a logic where they are doing their utmost to depopulate themselves. More recently, I'm gonna make a small digression. Apparently, some retard, the guy who attempted to shoot Trump, had posted online a poviska, so basically a convocation, whatever you want to call it, letter, with a certain marking, a certain number from a certain TCK area. And after a small, calculus from the team, we ended up by saying that basically that area, that rayon, had already called up, at least, maybe not mobilized, but called up at least 3% of the pre-war rayon's male population that could be called up according to the law since the beginning of the war in 4 months in 2024. We're not speaking about the whole war. We're speaking just about 2024. 3% of the potentially mobilizable people in 4 months. And the war is over 30 months older. I'm not saying that it's 3% for 4 months like that. It's just saying that right now the situation is so bad that just grabbing everyone they can, or at least they're sending convocations for these people as much as they can. So if you want to understand how dire the situation is, there are plenty of crumbs around. There are intellectual crumbs, there are economical crumbs. You have policy crumbs. Like sometimes the Ukrainian government is suspending some payments because he wants to keep up. The Ukrainian government, for instance, says that the payroll for their state employees, which also includes the um, military and security forces, is $21 billion. And once you start dwelling down, you see that these guys are having probably 2.2 million people in their payroll. And of course, once again, that's nothing to do with 2.2 military. It's, you got the cops, you got the health ministry, all of these guys who get paid within the current reimbursement program, all this shit. So nurses, doctors, and so on. But then you start digging and you see, for instance, that in 2023, they had 1.1 million inpatient surgery procedures. And you start to think like, okay, wait a minute, they have 450 hospitals and they're doing 1.1 million surgery procedures, and it can be everything. Like, for instance, if you want to take the case of France has 7.3 thousand institutions that can perform as inpatient ambulatory surgery. So basically, people have to stay after the surgery. And they are at maybe 6 million a year. It's completely fucked up, and you can understand the impact of the war. I'm not saying that the 1.1 million are all wounded. No, I'm saying that France does that shit with 15 times more equipment and 15 times more resources, does 6 times more or less. Ukraine, with 15 times less resources, does 1/6. So you have to understand what's going on here. You have a very severe stress due to the war, and it can be everything. It can be a kid that gets bombed by a caliber. It can be some dude that walks on a mine. It can be the soldiers themselves that can get ferried to be quote unquote inpatient. Some of the guys who get wounded and get taken out for a week or two, they don't require a surgery and stay inside. They get stitched, whatever, they get thrown away. This is what I want to say, that once you start seeing all these signs, you start understanding that what Ukraine is doing in Pokrovsk is suicide. What they do in Kursk is suicide. But for some reason, they decided in 2022 that suiciding was better than actually getting a deal that would probably allow them to fight another day and be a lot more dangerous than they are right now. And it's not even martyrdom is victory, because there is no martyrdom. They're just getting hacked slowly in silence, and everybody's watching this train wreck. And the Kursk situation embodies this problem in the best way possible, because all of the bad options that Ukrainians had, they chose the worst. And they didn't choose it based on the cost benefit. They chose it because it would, according to Zelensky, resonate the furthest, and they could start using the Russian territories as a bargaining chip for the territories that he says Russia is occupying. But even a fucking kid in preschool can see that 800 square kilometers, if we take Cope State, against 100-something thousand square kilometers ain't never gonna happen. It makes no sense. So the quest for the relevancy of what happened in Kursk is still out there. The diversion of troops, as I said, could make sense, but it would have required a lot more troops, and the Ukrainians obviously didn't have them if they were to still keep Pokrovsk more or less alive, let alone Ugledar, let alone Chastovya, and so on and so forth. So the only way this works is, as I said, they try Kursk, it fails, it makes everything worse in Donbass, and possibly in Zaporozhye, and possibly in Lugansk. And they are with this situation where everything is fucked up, and they go to Sugar Daddy Biden and say, "Bro, you have to help me because otherwise the Russians gonna win." And this situation degraded on their fucking behalf. The Ukrainians going with the infamous German motto, better a terrible ending than a terror without ending. Literally, they went fucking tits up. They are going to get absolutely smashed. The lines might well crumble, way worse than we see right now in Donetsk. And then the only option for America, especially before these elections, would be, and thanks to DCX for that, because I think this option makes the most sense right now, then America would be forced to do drastic shit like allowing the Ukrainians to use JASM or Atacams or whatever in Russian territory, according to the Ukrainians, giving them what I'm going to speak in a couple of moments, a beefier help and aid, starting to make sure that the Russians cannot evade some sanctions that they were able right now by pressuring the Chinese, by starting to shit on the Iranians. So generally speaking, what's going on here is that the Ukrainians are trying to deter the situation so badly that the Americans will be forced to do something about it. That's a long shot, to be honest. I'm going to tell you, because the Russians do not need to deter the situation that bad. They will do it when time comes. But right now, what they want is just Ukrainians to die. What the Russians want is for more Ukrainians to fucking be turned into fertilizer, as Ukrainians love to say. The more they lose, the less they have the chance to use those weapons that they have. Because that's the funny thing, and this is one of the things that actually is going to resonate with the fucking Zigro crowd who wants the bridges to be blown. Okay, you blew the bridges, but where's the exploitation? You just blew a bridge 150, 160 kilometers, but you don't have the troops or the means to do that 160 in 2 days, and therefore completely seal the Dnieper. You don't have it. That's also sobering. People need to understand that. But what you can do, as I said, is make it absolutely mindless for them to still keep defending all these positions at once. And at some point, the Ukrainians themselves, and that's what Zelensky is saying now, and pretending that what he wants to do is having these Atacams attacks, having this green light to fire Western weapons and missiles deeper into Russia, while also trying to have a localized ceasefire. So basically, as a lot of people paraphrased, he wants to freeze Donbass and maybe Zaporozhye while he's keeping Kursk operation open and is lobbing missiles into Russia. This, of course, is complete fucking madness. We know that. Everybody knows that. And this is a bad Minsk situation. This is literally Minsk 1 towards Minsk 2. They got their shit kicked in 2014, and then they started their shenanigans to try and grab more territory in Donetsk for a new operation around the city, and then the Russians replicated, kicked their teeth again inside, and again the sanction regime started in. Putin went like, okay, you know what, fuck this shit, let's stop again, and let's make them comply with something that Ukrainians will never do. But now we have a completely different option. Now we're not speaking about 3% of the Ukrainian territory without Crimea. We're speaking about 70% of that territory. And the risk of, as I said, the counter reaction from the Russian side is not trying to, I don't know, hit weapons in Uman or hit weapons in Lvov or hit weapons in Lutsk. No, very simple, very efficient, extremely forbidden, which is take it on the civilian population. Maybe not directly. Making sure that Ukrainian entity, Ukrainian polity, cannot survive with this modus operandi. So, electricity must go. Make it as hard as possible for Ukrainian production also to exist. Start maybe hitting a couple of bulk carriers, burning grain, attacking the dislocations of the Reni port, burning Ismail port, making sure that Ukrainians are forced to reinforce every single time, every single position, which means that they're going to be forced to grab people from absolutely critical industries, which is what we're seeing a shortage of manpower into the metallurgic industry, coal mines getting closed or getting short-handed, women being thrown to the coal mines, women being thrown to the industry, therefore lowering the threshold for, you guessed it, for birth, and therefore slightly choking the Ukrainian nation, and then a bit further, a bit further, a bit further, and voila, by 2026, Ukrainian births will be under 100,000 people. However you want to put it, it is a fucking catastrophe. It's not good looking. It doesn't sell as well as a Thunder Run to Baghdad. But God forbid how fucking efficient that is. With this approach, although I'm not a fan of it, by year 3, of course, with this approach, what you leave behind you when this is done is, and that's something I think is going to go fast enough, is a Ukrainian nation of roughly 20 million within the territory that would stay Ukrainian, and a lot of people seeing that they're going to lose a huge part of the country, so a huge part of the potential the country had, are just going to move out. Less kids, people moving out, older people starting to die, and the only possibility for Ukraine to rebuild it would have to be going towards immigration. And we all know how fucking well receiving the Slavic and Eastern European communities are towards immigration, especially a certain type of immigration. And of course, the remaining Ukrainian nations are going to get plundered by the surroundings, so Germany, Poland, and so on. The Polish don't care. Although the Polish government is yapping about creating all this fucking Polish Legion, their employers say, "Fuck no, you're not going to do that. We count on this cheap labor to actually keep this fake war-centered growth that's going within Poland, because Poland, like Russia, is not at war. Poland is just grifting the war effort, and the latest was the fact that I hadn't paid the share at the EFA for the Pavel initiative, but that's something else. And finally, I have to say the Polish there did a splendid. They yapped a lot, they did nothing, but they're part of the team. You know, they got that A grade on the assignment while doing jack squat. But then we have the other problem with Ukraine, and the other problem is, unfortunately, as I said, Pokrovsk. And that's not going away. For the last 2 weeks, the whole area, if we put it in conjunction with the losses under Pokrovsk and the losses towards Ugledar, we're seeing that they lost like 300 square kilometers. In this case, the loss, uh, also involves areas when they aren't in control anymore. The Russians might not be in control either, but that's a loss for the Ukrainian forces. For the Russians, being, let's say, in Ukraine, but having Ukrainians leave half of the city of Selidovo, it's great for them. Maybe they don't control it, but neither do the Ukrainians. That's the advantage of the attacking side. Now, the biggest issue when it comes to Pokrovsk is that I've already spoke about this before anyone else. The team was 100% on the ball on that one. We thought about Pokrovsk being a bit far for this year. Fortunately, now we are a bit molding because the Russians have opted for, obviously, for the most conservative way to deal with this, which is clearing the flanks, opening the whole front over 40 kilometers, trying to go as further south and north in order for Ukrainians also themselves to stretch out. And the moment everything's going to be stretched out, well, they're just going to fucking overrun the line at some point, have a breakthrough, and then straight to Pokrovsk. Straight to Mironograd, straight to Pokrovsk, and the deed is done. You've seen this multiple times. Mironograd is going to look like Soledar. Pokrovsk is going to look like Bahmut. Pokrovsk is going to look like Rubishnoa. Pokrovsk is going to look like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. We are into territory that the Russians know, that the Russians have done multiple times. Now, is this the only way to do it? Unfortunately, right now, as I said, there is no other way. The posture that the Russians have assumed suffers of multiple weaknesses. As I said, they are not in full control of the Ukrainian air defenses that would allow them to use other assets than gliding bombs and long-range missile artillery and these incursions with smaller to bigger groups and then a mechanized push. Generally speaking, as I said, the problem with the Russian permanent pressure on point or on zone is that it is equipment and supply intensive. But the gains yield by that approach far outweigh the losses when it comes to the objective. Like, people are gonna say, "Oh, nobody's gonna fucking sacrifice 300 tanks to take Avdiivka," and I'm like, why not? Since Avdiivka has gone down, the Russians have absolutely thrashed the Ukrainians on one of their most fortified areas. We all remember this article last year saying that at some point in October 2038 or whatever, Zelensky wanted to order an attack on the Golovka axis, and the leadership said, like, with what, motherfucker? Like, bro, I know you like Coke, but we don't have the men. They're all either rotting in Zaporozhye or they're trying to fend off the Russians everywhere else. And yeah, it's true that for a lot of you, it's going to say, like, wow, fuck, 200, 300 tanks lost to take Avdiivka and surroundings. That's fucking crazy. Yeah, well, find a solution to FPVs, find a solution to American ISR, find a solution to the permanent resupply of the Ukrainians, find a solution to the lack of blockade. Not because that Russia cannot do or can do it, but simply because NATO has decided they're going to supply, they're going to fucking side with Ukraine. Maybe China should have fucking sided with the Taliban in 2001 and started giving fucking shit ton of supplies of ATGMs and manpads and shit like that. I guarantee you that fucking shit show doesn't look the same. Like, you are gonna have a complete lack of traffic of helicopters. Most of the aerosols that the Americans try to fucking enforced and used rather competently would not exist. You would have to do everything by the ground, and you're gonna get in the same fucking truck war that the Soviets and the DRA had to deal with back when it was the Mujahideen in the 80s. There is no magic. You cannot go around topography. You cannot go around some choke points. And that's the fucking problem the Russians have right now. It's not the Soviet Union anymore when they can out fucking produce every motherfucker there. It's a fraction of what the Soviet Union was. And now, of course, it's not taking over against NATO either. But that's the fucking problem you have. Because it's still part of NATO. And it's still a huge, pervasive system that NATO is using. And it doesn't matter if the trigger puller is Ukrainian or German or whatever. This hybrid proxy war we're seeing is about to culminate. And I think the most evident sign of this is what is being rumored to be a huge 3 point something billion dollar package to come through with new Abrams, new Bradleys, and a lot of other goodies. And that's what it is. And I think the Americans themselves now understand that they cannot fucking let the Ukrainians trash Pokrovsk, but at the same time, they cannot start fucking having a war with Russia. So, as usual, the Americans are going to take the worst of the decisions, which is give the Ukrainians enough rope to hang themselves, make life a lot more difficult for the Russians, and at the end try and fucking amend both sides a bit like what Trump was saying. It's go and see the Russians say, if you don't stop, I'm going to give the keys of the fucking bank to the Ukrainians, and then go to the Ukrainians. If you don't fucking start negotiating, I'm going to cut your aid. This schizophrenic blackmailing from the US is everything. And of course, there is a huge problem for the Americans. That they, in a certain sense, I do not think they were aware that the Russians would go to the finish like this. There is no way the Americans in 2022 were saying, you know what, it's going to be fucking great. We're going to give JASM or JASM extended range to Ukraine. It's going to be just cool. The Russians are not going to budge. They're going to say, like, you know what, bomb us, just defeat us so, you know, we can crumble and then you can start cutting us Versailles style. No. I think the Americans were fucking worried as fucking hell that the Russians would nuke the Ukrainian forces, either in Kharkov or in Kherson. And they still are. The whole fucking deal right now with the allowing or not the strikes, although it could be just fucking theater, is that it's to show everybody that we care about that, and whatever decisions being taken is because we don't want to lose our proxy in the war, and we don't want to have another Afghanistan. But of course, as I said, it's still going to be the same thing as with the F-16, the same thing as with the Abrams, the same thing as with the Leopards. It's going to be a token of forces. It's going to be a bit easier logistically because the Americans have a lot more to, you know, put on the planes. But at the end, it's just going to contribute to kill more Ukrainians. And as I say, the Russians still conserve the opportunity and the option to just start killing civilians. Then what? What the fuck are you going to do? Give more JASM? Intervene? Have a nuke war? That's what I'm saying. The problem for the Russians right now is that either they preempt all this bullshit and they start literally a terror campaign in Ukraine, and I don't mean a stray missile into a fucking hospital ward or whatever. No, I'm saying waiting for a fucking peak hour at an epicenter and smashing a KH-22 in there and it's done. Making the same choices that were made in Syria, which is depriving the Mujahideens, depriving the jihadists, depriving the assholes from their fucking rear, immediate rear, social rear, family rear, making sure that there is no future for you. And it doesn't need to be a genocide. No, it just needs to be painful enough that you start thinking twice. Because this is the thing. Once you get to that point, you're going to start interrupting life in Ukraine. And I hear a lot of people, I had a lot of fucking bullshit about guys going there to Kyiv to live and so on. Oh, but life is almost normal here. If it wasn't for the Iskanders and for the drones, oh, it would be so. I'm like, bro, it's not like that. Those cities live because the East is on fire. Start making whatever is remaining east of the Dnieper flee across the fucking river and start packing and stacking on the western bank of the Dnieper, you're gonna see how fun it's gonna be. It's going to be exactly what happened early in 2022 when a bunch of people just moved westwards, and the first tensions within the Ukrainian society between the Western Ukrainians and the internal refugees started to open up, internal displaced people start to flare up. And this might sound completely crazy. You are going like, what the fuck is this? No, this is actually how you overload the system. You can do it technically, blowing the electrical grid, taking out large storages of commodities, making sure that people have nothing, that they need to be spoon-fed socially, what exactly the Russians did in Syria, which is completely cutting off the rear and making it logistically untenable for a lot of people on the jihadi side, on the head chopper side, to keep going with the war. It was a grinding process. It started in 2015 and it ended up in 2020. And since then, okay, you got still these remnants of the civil war, the shit show going on with the Americans and the Kurds, and still ISIS being this cancer in the desert. But for most of it, the rebels themselves, they know they're just puppets now. If once Turkey is going to decide to pull the plug out of them, well, they're going to end up in the Caesar folder again. So this is what the Ukrainians are looking at right now. And Zelensky, when he says that the Russians need to feel this, is projecting what he fears going to happen to them. These strikes for Zelensky are, in a certain sense, preempting what's going to happen to them when their forces are going slowly to be back down from the Donetsk Oblast towards the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So the big game right now for him, especially in Pokrovsk area, is to make it as painful as possible for the Russians at the line and behind the line, but at the same time try not to lose it too early and too fast. If Pokrovsk is done this year, 2025 is going to be a series of catastrophes for the Ukrainian army because they're going to have a huge ground to cover with very little defensive positions. Whereas the Russians, as I said, if Pokrovsk falls, they're going to have a whole fucking network of smaller cities to stage their troops and have them push towards whenever you want. Either laterally, or what they did right now with the attack on the Velika Novosibirsk axis that probably reached Zoltaniva, and the attack up north of Ugledar with the advancement on the South Donbass mines, the 1, 2, and 3 shots. Then they're going to have this junction between Novoukrayinsk and the forces coming from the mines. And then suddenly you have two huge salient for the Ukrainians where they're going to be trapped as fuck. And what are you going to do? Either the Russians going to have the options to whack those stallions. As I said, they're going to make the stallions run by pushing even further laterally beyond Velika Novosilka and entering laterally into Zaporozhye and starting to take places like Orikhiv, places like Pologi, they have it already, but advancing on the Orkiv axis, starting to bypass Kamyansk and push the Ukrainians so far that they're going to be at the limits of Zaporizhzhia city. These are the disasters that Ukrainians are risking to get in 2025. And I know a lot of people say, but it's still nothing, bro. You're speaking about what? 4,000 square kilometers? I'm saying, but that's the fucking point of this war, my man. It has nothing to do with taking over all of Ukraine. It has to do with forcing Ukrainians to commit as much as possible into defending areas that are actually irrelevant for them to defend. Honestly, I'm going to tell you, if I am Zelensky right now, I'm choosing two axes to defend. All the rest, I'm letting it rot. If you are going to start and block the Russians in Donbass with the intensity we're seeing right now, and you fail there, and the Russians have a full highway behind them, and you cannot stop them in their advance, you're going to end up losing a whole southern salient of Kharkov, which means that suddenly, for almost 3 years, you stop the Russians from encircling that city, but you're going to be forced to abandon a whole swath south of it just to avoid not getting caught from the advance, both from Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and from Donetsk Oblast. This is not for tomorrow. This is a long-term project once again. But the problem is, as I said to you guys, is that the Ukrainians, if they are smart right now, they stop their bullshit. They try to speak to the Russians and obtain a temporary ceasefire, maybe 6 months, that would allow them to actually breathe. But not this bullshit of, oh, you know what? Some localized ceasefire when I'm lobbing ballistic missiles into your ass and drones and I let the sanctions also fucking start to hit you because this is the thing. The worst thing for the Russians right now, not in 2 or 3 years, would be to stop the war effort right now and start piling up on orders, start piling up on supplies that need to be used. The thing with the Russians right now, it's a strict flux. It's a short fucking pattern flux. A factory, storage, distribution, frontline. But once you start producing and there is this fucking shitty piece, then you have other shit that's gonna start appearing. Your warehouses are gonna be starting to be full. People are gonna start seeing also, oh, wait a minute, peace is nice as well. We have what we needed more or less. What's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is that when you're gonna do your whole fucking storage thing, it will leave the Americans the time to pinpoint your whole logistical alley that right now they have a little bit of a problem to fix, and then allow the Ukraine a preventive strike and give them a little bit of a head start in the third or fourth round, depending how you count. So my problem here is that the Ukrainians are taking all the wrong decisions based on this hubris that they need to win the war. At the same time, the victory they described, which, oh, we're going to stay independent and we're going to have our territory and all this shit. No, bro, no, that's not how it works. It works in a very simple pattern. You give up some territories, you don't sign the dotted line for good, so you don't give the Russians the possibility to say, okay, you admitted you lost this, and that. You do another Minsk. The issue with that is that nobody's gonna fucking take the bait anymore. The issue with all this situation, all these shenanigans, is that now you brought the Americans in. Before, the Americans would give you data, would give you targeting shit, whatever. But now what you're saying, what you actually are implying is that America needs to do something for you. First it's going to be ATACMS, then it's going to be, longer range systems, and then at the end, the whole charade of Americans not being there yet, Ukrainians being extremely performant in learning shit that Americans themselves take years to actually use, is gonna fall down. And then what? You know, a lot of people. I don't know if you guys follow Colbert Selby, but the guy used to be a super fucking hawk until suddenly it was discovered that maybe the Americans were gonna start allowing the Ukrainians to use ballistic missiles, and the guy is flipping right now. He's like, how the fuck are you even thinking about that? That kind of proliferation is gonna lead to a reply from the Russians. It doesn't even need to be a Iskander to Ramstein. No, what it's gonna be is TOT to groups or regimes, quote unquote, that would make your life a living fucking hell. And it's already out there about nuclear secrets and submarine secrets given to China, nuclear secrets given to Iran, TOT for aeronautic parts given to Iran. Houthis now fucking lobbing a 2,000-kilometer ballistic missile straight to fucking Israel. Like all these small things, although they may be nothing, have people who are still not fearful but are still down to earth saying like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, it goes both ways. It's like a fucking tracer. And we are not discussing about North Korea. We are not discussing about Libya. We are discussing about one big, huge, chungus motherfucker who not only has enough nukes to fucking vaporize us and themselves as well, but has the know-how to make people who are eager to fucking kill us, and by us I mean Europe, have the means to do it for as long as it doesn't touch fucking Russia. The enemy of my enemy is my friend works both ways, guys. And it's gonna start working like this without a fucking problem. So when I hear once again people being super adamant that, oh, it will take just yet another Wunderwaffe, like Zelensky tries to fucking sell this, and this is why somehow I'm lost at words. How this guy, seeing his country getting pummeled by ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, shaheeds, uh, gliding bombs and shit, and still being there, thinks this is gonna work on Russia. That's the mystery. And therefore, what I think, it has nothing to do with winning this war. I think that, as I said multiple times, I think the Ukrainian leadership right now is there to wreck shit up. I think they understood that at some point they're gonna have to sit somewhere and maybe not capitulate, but sign off 20, 25, 30% of the territory. And what they want for it is that the Russians pay with blood, with tears, with money, with destruction. There is no other explanation. And once again, the Russian economy could tank tomorrow, and they're still gonna fucking make steel bits for tanks, and they're still gonna fucking produce planes. Because what's going on right now, and on that Putin is right, unfortunately, and nobody listened to him, but, you know, it's normal. The hubris on the Western side is so high, and the self-entitlement is so high that, I mean, I have no other words to say but self-deluded, suicidal maniacs, because the real threat is not Russia. Russia will fucking gobble whatever they want in Ukraine or whatever are let to gobble in Ukraine. But it's the European development that's at stake. The real threat is coming from Asia. This is not some Asia-China scaremongering. I'm gonna tell you as I think. It's a natural course of things. Europe fucked up its divestment, fucked up its norms, fucked up the vision it had at some point because they wanted to become the sugar baby of Uncle Sam. And this is why putting a retard above you leads to especially greedy assholeish retard like the US system is. And I'm not saying it's gonna be fucking roses collaborating with Russia, no. But at least there was a logic. They are in Europe, we are in Europe, it's fine. We can work something out. And what does it even mean? What does it mean that Ukraine is free, independent, whatever? How many smaller nations within the European system are really free? Like Greece was put in a fucking tutelage for 10 years because of a system that Europe fucking contributed to build up, both by corruption and by absolutely mind-blowingly bad vision. Um, Hungary is such a case. Slovakia is such a case. These countries, for some reason, they don't want to fucking walk through the same line as everyone because they see that it actually makes them a lot less competitive within the union. And Germany was using this, I'd say, backwardsness of the Eastern European countries to make money of them by having cheap, specialized labor and literally plunging the profit out of these guys. And it wasn't only Germany. South Korea is almost everywhere in Slovakia. Again, in Poland and so on. Like, the whole logic of the European Union would have been so much more interesting by trying to have any kind of relationship with Russia that wasn't trying to fucking make their life harder than it already is. Turkey is another case. Europe used Turkey as a secondary, depository for direct foreign aid and direct foreign investment. And at some point, where the political agenda of the melon seller went awry, when suddenly Turkey stopped actually growing, its lira went to shit, and you have the situation now where the Turks are applying to BRICS. Of course, it doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things because Turkey is attached to Europe in a way or another through the Black Sea, the Bosphorus, and being the bridge between Asia and Europe. But so is Russia. So you have these connections with other parts of the world that Europe still either fears or wants to dominate. But that's not how it works nowadays. Since the Second World War, the gravity of danger, of course, shifted back to east for Europe. Not from within, like it was with the Germans and the in internecine conflicts. But now Europe was literally pressured between, well, the Soviet Union and the US. Everything else was game. There were still colonies until well deep in the 70s. South America was still having these no-touch signs from Uncle Sam. And the biggest actual playground that was, and that's why we had so many wars, was Asia. Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, all this stuff. Historically, now that Asia more or less solved that problem, although it's not as, you know, well as before, because you don't have a dominating power. There is one, China, but nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to say, okay, let's ride the China dick and make sure that Asia is the number one continent. Although by the numbers it is population, GDP, consumption, most of the innovation. Like there is not even a fucking question of who's the future promised to. And one of the ways to not have this future so fucking clean cut, but have a more participative way of dealing with problems, was to use Russia both as a buffer for China. Once again, I do not approve of this. My logic is not that. I'm saying for Europe would have been to go through Russia towards China and have this kind of Eurasian logic. But no, the US would have been slighted and isolated, and actually would have been caught on both sides, with Europe on its east and China on its west, or Asia on its west. And that's the main scare. America is just another Russia. They just don't want to become what Russia was becoming, with NATO creeping in, with its relevance being questioned, with its near abroad getting into a shit show of firestorm. Georgia, first Karabakh, second Karabakh, Chechnya with a flare ups from time to time, situation in Armenia, Syria with that bullshit that Turkey tried to, take out, let's call it the client state. When you see generally, that's what America wants to avoid. And the fact that Chinese are busting into Mexico, and the possibility for the Chinese to start investing in Latin America, is the exact same fucking scare that the Russians have with their near abroad. So once you analyze it like this, you understand that for Europe, the only way is going to be to get back into the Russia game and try to have something to exchange with China. And by that, I don't mean monopoly money as the US. I don't mean debt-fueled growth. I mean something different, which is a kind of division of labor, trying to have a more or less better competition with the future, which is parts of Africa and the resettlement of the order within Asia. This is one of the things that, like, America cannot touch. America is too far from those points. They cannot even deal properly with South America, let alone with starting shit in Africa, starting shit in Asia. Although they have a fuck ton of bases, fuck ton of influence, and fuck ton of interest, America would be overstretched to deal with all this stuff. That's why Europe is so important for the African continent. Now, all this said and done, the problem that I'm going to go, why I went to this rant, the problem for Europe is that they're not going to win anything, whoever wins in Ukraine. What they're going to have is a huge loss, a big L, big fat fucking L, which then would have a lot more, how can I say this? A lot more impact on how they're going to fucking deal with the divorce to come with the US of A. America is doing everything to upset Europe right now. Subsidies that are completely butt fucking the World Trade Organization rule that they wanted to do. They are poaching European capital. They are poaching European ideas. They are poaching European startups. This is something that they always did, because they, as I said, they were just fucking flashing funny money. And well, what are you gonna do? There is the army to back the dollar, the U.S. military. The problem is that U.S. military cannot start backing the dollar everywhere. And there is where there was there's still a window for Europeans to understand that at some point, the American umbrella is too small. And what's going on with Ukraine actually should show to any European that it's better to have a loaded gun but drink a beer with the Russians than trying to make up ammunition tanks with a dwindling population for most of Europe. Okay, that's also Russia. That's not the point. But I'm saying that you have a win-win situation or lose-lose. In this case, there is no in between. There is no Cold War 2.0 or something. Europe just cannot afford it. And we're seeing it because we are into this fucking Cold War 2.0. Germany is getting down. The French are getting to shit. The growth is hampered everywhere. It's a fucking line. And once again, this doesn't mean that Russia is getting so much better. It just means that the situation right now is a huge loss for any side involved within the European continent. And this is the only way that you have to interpret this war. Ukraine, Russia, when it comes to this neighbor's food, that's something that, of course, is horrible and has delivered us some of the most abject images. Although we root for one side, and sometimes we want more of those images when it's against the other side. The situation, if you want to fucking be honest with yourself, is a fucking catastrophe. Like, at the end, we're gonna have at least 1 million casualties, both sides. Um, as I said, a complete destruction of the Ukrainian polity. A 20 million Ukraine is nothing anymore. They wouldn't be able to manage the land they would have if they managed to survive with some pieces beyond the Dnieper. If it goes the way it's going right now, and all this is because at some point someone went to Kiev and said to Zelensky, "Oh, no problem, bro. You're gonna win this war." And this is literally going to your bar, finding some bozo and saying, "Bro, you're gonna have to fight Mike Tyson in his prime. I'm sure it's gonna fucking work." Because he's a bit drunk right now. He just got out of jail because of a rape. And you're like, "No problem. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna beat this guy." And then you're round 8. You have no more teeth, and the guys behind you are literally fucking pumping you full of adrenaline and drugs just to keep you up. That's how the weapon shipments are working on Ukraine right now. And that's why how the way the war is going, when you see Pokrovsk, you see Kursk, and you see also the risk taking from Zelensky, is showing you what the problem is. And the lack of escalation, quote unquote, from Russia, which is actually not a lack of escalation. Escalation is that they're going to the end of what they're saying, like, we're going to absolutely fuck you up, shows who is actually panicking. Remember that the Russians went completely ballistic September 2022, announced mobilization, announced the fucking annexations. We had this first huge campaign of counter energy strikes with Gerans, with everything. And that was Russians panicking. Like, they need to do something to stop it. Fast forward 2024, you had the Ukrainians panicking. And this is what's going on right now. The Kursk gambit, the pleas to have these long range strikes, to have more equipment, more money, more everything, the begging. This was what happened by October 2022, October, November. And they got shit delivered from November 2022 to about April, June 2023. We know what happened. It was the counter. It was a shit show. They completely got smashed. Here it's different. As I said, they need to do something. They're doing something. And this is going to be theatrically played as, okay, see, we still have the capability. Just give us the weapons. We'll finish the job. This, of course, is bullshit, but, that's the ploy. Now, this ploy is going to cause a lot of grief to a lot of people. Ukraine, Russia, Europe, probably a bit in the US, but they're going to feel it later. The reality of this is that Ukraine is not giving itself any time. I really thought that it would just try to, fight it off, stall the Russians in the Ocheretina axis towards Pokrovsk. But no, they decided, as I said, in my opinion, to deteriorate everything. So it's going to be a lot easier to ask for the American help and to ask for the Americans to do something that they are not ready to do. In a certain sense, to blackmail them through shaming them by saying, see, you're going to fucking let us down again. And this worked in a certain sense pretty well with the whole stalling in Congress. with the linkage that Trump made between the border situation in the US and the aid to Ukraine. And with the elections coming, and let's say that Trump loses, I don't see anything that the Americans could do to change the current trend when it comes to what they give as supplies. This huge package that's going to be given, which is logical because um, legally the PDA is going to expire, quote unquote. The problem with that is that the Ukrainians are just not there. When you see how fucking bad they are feeling in Kursk into very simple tasks, and how the operation that was supposed to be a triumph for a week or 10 days quickly enough started having the same problems that the Russians had after a week or two, but with the whole of the front in Ukraine. You can see they haven't solved any of their problems. There is no magical bullet for them to kill the Russian bear. So what's going to happen is just a slugging match between a pig and a bear, where the bear is going to have just more difficult to put the pig down to the ground and then eat it. So once again, the problem with Pokrovsk, the problem with Kursk, line up pretty well to where the Ukrainian state is right now, to the level of panic they have. This is just like an overview. I'm not going to start giving you numbers. I'm not going to start giving you things because right now they are meaningless. This is one thing I learned after the first Ukrainian counter. Unlike what they say, Ukrainians do not fucking value at all the life of their soldiers. Because they're going to keep grinding that shit. They're going to keep sending people to die. They're going to keep sending people to get captured. And at the end, it will never matter. It will not matter that the quote unquote the exchange fund will not be enough to fucking get back all the people they're going to lose in Kursk and Pokrovsk anyway. It will also all not matter at all that the losses that they're going to incur right now in Kursk there are over 25 tanks. And it's okay, because it's not one per day, so it's fine. The problem is that Kursk is only one front. You have also other places where they're losing vehicles. And at some point, there will not be any more vehicles to give them from their legacy tanks. There will not be more vehicles to be refurbished. They will not be able to capture the measly 5 or 6 tanks they captured in Kursk from the Russians. Like, at some point, the music will stop. But that's for both sides, by the way. It's not just for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians just have less, so they are the ones at risk of stopping first. And there's nothing better to show that problem than Ugledar. Ugledar, you guys saw the thread about a week ago from Ostintua, that asshole. And it was like they took a village and 2 lines, and then finally, when you see the map on Deep State and you see the geolocations, it was a little bit more than a village and two trenches. But you could see there the depletion of the Ukrainian army. Ugledar was a fucking fortress for 2 years. And then suddenly, 2 months ago, the whole shebang goes down. You could say in Pokrovsk, you could make this fucking coup by saying, oh, it's a trap. We're going to let the Russians advance and then we're going to get them. Now you know that it's not like that. Because I already explained that if it was like that, then the front in Pokrovsk should be not more than 10 to 12 kilometers. But how is it going? The front's going to be 40. And then is when you run into problems. But in Ugledar, the front was extremely limited. They could barely go beyond the river Pavlivka was a shit show. All the attempts made to cut the all 0532, 0542 were mostly failures. But suddenly something happens just after Kharkov, and it's bingo. And now the biggest trash situation for Ukrainians is not even Chastov Yar, it's not Pokrovsk, it's not even the fact they're getting their ass handed over to them in Kursk. Is literally they're going to lose Ugledar, and once that shit falls, and they get, as I said, to Velika Novosilka, then they can just fucking march up north because they're going to have the upper ground, join to Kurakovka, to Kurakova, sorry, Russians are going to join from north to south from the Pokrovsk front, and suddenly what you had in mind initially to be a 10, 15 kilometer large front becomes a 38, 40, and then ends up being an 80-kilometer front when the Russians have the whole fucking line. And suddenly you find yourself into a shit show. And Zelensky is going to go again in one of his interviews and say, since we started Kursk, the Russians are advancing a lot slower. We managed to stall the advance. And then at some point, I would literally conjure most of the Ukrainian general staff that would hear that to load up their guns, suck the fucking barrel, and pull the trigger. Because this was not something Zelensky would do. Of course, he would lie. He lied for the death. He lied for a lot of things. But lying towards the reality, and we're not speaking about the interception bullshit. No, we're speaking about you are looking at someone breaking down your door, entering, stealing the shit out of your house, and you're saying, door is strong, it's stopped. How do they say? 19 attacks in the direction of the door were stopped. Like, motherfucker, half of your house is empty and he's literally doing your wife. This is the problem we're having with Zelensky. That's why I said there is a level of panic among people who are not around him because they understand that something is going on. If you see a couple of telegrams, we have the Magyar one. Hopefully it's a deep fake, because if it's true, oh my god, they're going to lose one of the most competent grifters in this war. But we also had guys from the right sector, guys from Azov. Everybody is saying right now from that fringe area that Zelensky better not fucking negotiate and sign a bad deal for Ukraine. And I'm like, who the fuck are you guys to talk like that? The only thing you're doing is sitting with your asses far away, grifting money, sending small toys with explosives, killing Russians, and then eating UMPKs. Everywhere FPV crews have been going in Ukraine, the front has been collapsing a lot faster because these motherfuckers are not soldiers. They have a multiplying force, they are fearsome, they are whatever, but once your trench falls and the Russians literally walk through it and enter to your fucking FPV lair, you are eating 545 all over your body. It's literally the longbow fucking man against a cavalry charge. You ain't all that. The French fucking up Idazancourt and later, because of their hubris, doesn't change the fact that they're gonna fucking run down you at some point and kick you out of France. This is a historical reference because I like it. I think this is what's gonna happen to the way Ukraine is fighting. They are ignoring the most salient point of a war, which is having enough bodies. They did it in 2022 because they still had the possibility to do everything, and the Russians tried to literally force their way clad in iron and armor. And then things changed for both sides, exactly like it changed for the 100 Years' War historically. But the problem with all these FPV guys is that there are smaller groups that do not constitute, that have an oversized influence, of course, an oversized reach. But at the end, is the fucking mogilized Mikola who's gonna hold the trench. Not the FPV guys. The FPV guys are gonna run out of FPVs at some point, and then they're gonna have to wait for a couple of Bukhankas or a couple of vans to come with the rest of them. But by the time that fucking shit comes, the Russians are already in the village. And the people who are supposed to stop the Russians are not the FPV guys, are the numbers, are the Fatso Mikolas that they put on the Frenches. And this is the whole game here. This is why I think Zelensky has understood that. I'm going to repost what I posted at the initial phase of Kursk. He had to do something. He did it because he thinks that the best way for him is to invoke the Americans by putting himself in such a situation that they will have to save him. Hopefully, they save him like the Russians saved Yanukovych by sending a fucking helicopter instead of sending the army. But overall, the way the Russians are doing this, like Chastov Yar is being breached, and it's being breached pretty badly because they're going under through the Klishivka part. They are going to get Grigorivka as well. Like everywhere except some small problems in the Lugansk area, everywhere is going to shit for the Ukrainians, and they know it. People on the ground know how fucking shit the situation is. They want to do something, they want to relieve pressure and everything. They just don't have them. Don't have the men, don't have the artillery, don't have the guns. And everybody's saying, oh yeah, we're going into this war production. The French say we are making per month now, we have the capacity to make per month what we made in 1 year, 3-4 years ago. I'm like, yes, fine. It means that you are gonna make 144 barrels for the whole fucking year. Well fucking done. It's like this is the greatest thing ever. Ukrainians in barrels alone, not amortizing them, just losing them, lose over 300. And we did this again. So overall, what's going on, as I said, is Ukrainians are going to get enough rope to hang themselves with. And at some point, the Americans would have to make a decision. As I said, either send the cavalry, either send helicopter to pick up Zelensky. And then sign something that hopefully would last a little bit more and would be a little more interesting than the Minsk 1 and 2. Because right now, the biggest issue that we're having is that whatever the Ukrainians are saying or trying to propose is a non-starter. It makes no sense. It just indicates that the Ukrainians are into a parallel universe and they are still not getting the point. Or there is something else that we don't know, and that means that the Ukrainian partners are selling them horse shit. It wouldn't be the first time that the same shit show, but our problem with Ukraine is that I'm speaking for Europeans. These guys that are on Azov, that are on all these drone groups, they're gonna have to work somehow because Ukraine, once the war stops, will have to pay the piper. There's the reconstruction part. Forget about the Russian funds. You're gonna have a lot of people that, of course, gonna find a way to rebuild, so they're gonna make some money. But in average, given the lack of territory and the risk of them losing a lot more strategic territory, as I said, potential loss of Zaporozhye, potential loss of part of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and so on, you're getting to a shit show that most of the people will just try and find their lives elsewhere. Not because it would be more complicated, less complicated, but because simply the rules of big market spending, like it happened in Iraq, like it happened in Afghanistan, like it happened in a lot of the countries that got out of the communist rule, you have a whole reshuffling of the economy, and soon enough, a consolidation of certain interests puts a lot of people out of the business, put a lot of the people out of the way. And the new order might be even worse for those Ukrainians who wanted to, have some kind of Pindos way of life in Ukraine. New order is just going to be as bad as the first. Look at how Zelensky right now is abusing power. And of course, a lot of people are going to say, oh, but it's war. And this. I say, that is not a problem. In middle of a war, Putin had a simulacrum of election. You don't need to do any of that. You are Zelensky. You can absolutely cheat in these elections. You are doing every single day by making everybody around you that's in the opposition rather insecure and rather confused. Most of the oligarchs in Ukraine have lost their relevancy. Yes, of course, they're contributing by buying shit for the military and buying shit for the wounded. Poroshenko, Pinchuk, Kolomoisky at some point. But the reality is that right now, Zelia is alone. He is running the show with his fucking circle of small people. That's it. There's no more to it. Ukraine has become the exact mirror image of Russia, that they want to admit it or not. Ukraine is now openly saying that we will attack the Russian civilians to make them feel what war looks like. These are not my words, this is literally his. Of course, it's paraphrased. He's not going to say, oh, we're going to bomb another hospital, but that's how he's saying. That's what it's going to mean. And this is where, as I said, the problem with Ukrainians trying to portray themselves as different is like, okay, you're the most retarded version of Russia, but still Russian, And that's it. There's nothing more to it right now. This is my reading of the situation, and this is also my reading of Kursk. Why is it going so bad, or why they are doing all these mistakes? There is no other way than them trying to make the situation so fucking worse than it could have been, that it would entail some kind of intervention for the US. As I said, it could be strikes, it could be armor, it could be more funds, it could be troops, it could be whatever. But the thing is, it could be explained by better, terrible end that a non-ending terror, never-ending terror. That's it. I don't see anything else. It's a fucking suicidal gambit. He wants to be suicided by Moscow, and there is not much more to it. Of course, we don't know the plans and we don't know a lot of things, but from every single movie is done so far, and I know there are going to be a lot of people saying, yeah, but the Russians try to negotiate no more strikes on energy infrastructure. I'm saying, yeah, and first thing that happens is that the Ukrainians didn't want to do it. So how Ukraine, who has a lot more to lose, given it has a lot less energy infrastructure to spare, is going to refuse. And they're going to refuse because the conditions for the stopping of this reciprocal attack, Ukraine's firing on the oil industry, gas industry, and Russians actually into the power generating and distribution, have to have some compromise in there. And I think that what the Russians are trying to say is that you don't attack me, I don't attack you, but for the Russians, having their oil industry in order is extra cash. For the Ukrainians, having their electricity in order is actual survival. Therefore, the Russians probably pressed their fucking demands on that. The added conditions were The Ukrainians probably were going to say okay at some point because they were being pressured, but at the end they said no because then they understood what it meant initially. It's better to start losing 1-1, like you inflict losses, you get losses, than nothing happens on both sides, but the attrition plays against you anyway. All these strikes that Ukrainians were doing on the energy structure, for them, they were oversized force multipliers and damage multipliers. Now, if you stop that, and of course they're going to stop the electricity part, the Russians, you are into a normal state. Like, you're going to have light, but the war rages on, and you are still losing as many soldiers as the other side, and not proportionally. So proportionally, you're losing 3 to 4 times more because, as I said, you lose one soldier and you can mobilize one, but if you lose 10, you can only mobilize 5. On the other side, the Russians lose 20, they mobilize 20. This is the whole fucking problem here. You just don't have the same means, and nobody wants to die for you either. Okay, you got the International Gay Pride Legion and Mercs and shit like that, but at the end of the day, those are a small sample of the huge part, which is some Mikola that you're gonna grab from the street, or that's gonna come because he doesn't want to fucking get stuck in whatever shit show he is. It's not complicated. Now there is, as I said, one way that this can play positive for the Ukrainians, and as I said, Americans allow for strikes, give enough tools for it. Right now they haven't. We are at 5 F-16s or 9, depending on if you believe or not that 10 have been given. And the usual sample for the strikes has been in the low hundreds. So these tolls in low hundreds, okay, it's gonna have definitely an impact. I'm not gonna start lying, but you're gonna maybe lose what, 20, 30, 40%? That means only 60 targets per 100. Just what are you gonna do with that? In order for you to treat enough targets with the over time eroding quality of your strikes, soon enough you're gonna be spending 600-700 JASMs, and you're really gonna hit 300 targets, which is still a huge part given the warhead, the tools, and everything. But at the end, what you're gonna do is get at least 3,000 calibers, couple hundred Iskanders, and the bombs will keep going. So the grind for this will require either a bigger volume or other weapons. And you're going to be in the same situation soon enough. And this has been the marking path for every quote-unquote Wunderwaffe that has been sent. With the exception of HIMARS, where the Russians, in my opinion, overestimated themselves, everything else has gone in, gone out, and the Russians have prevailed. How they've prevailed, that's, I'm going to say, it's something else. You may like it, you may not like it, but they have prevailed. It has been 2 years now. The Ukrainians cannot counter the Lancet. They cannot counter Krasnopols. They cannot counter UMPKs. And they're supposed to have a far better AD capability than 2 years ago. Allegedly. It's worse, of course. So all these things put together, you have the situation that you have right now, which is Ukraine is on the brink of a tactical systemic defeat, which is once you compute everything that you're doing over the course of time, the end game is the same if you keep doing the same thing. So basically, let's say something like this. One side has 30, the other side has 10. At each round, you're going to start extracting one from each side. And it doesn't mean that you need to play your 10 rounds to see that at the end of your 10 rounds, the other side's going to have 20. It's just predictability. The only way for you to win in this competition is at some point to change the rules. And that means that when the next round, instead of him pulling 1 like you, he should pull 10. But how do you force him to accept this rule that obviously is going to make him lose by the third round? Well, in the case of Ukraine, is a devastating weapon or the intervention of someone else. But so far, none of those are on the program. And therefore, the predictability of this is that Ukraine, by going like this, maybe it's going to take 6 months, maybe it's going to take 5 years, but there is no positive prognosis with this tempo and with these assets. Maybe suddenly the US military is going to send half of their forces, so like thousands and thousands of armored vehicles, 500 Abrams, 1,500 Bradleys, all this shit, maybe 200 Cobras, 300 planes. Of course, this is a pipe dream. But that's exactly where we are right now. For Ukraine to change all the fucking optics and change all the trend, it would need something that cannot happen in a fortnight. Even if the Americans drop, I don't know, 4 billion, 3.7 billion worth of equipment and everything, they dropped far more over a year and a half ago, when they started re-equipping the Ukrainian forces. We know what happened. So the level of aid, the level of supplies need to be a complete different level. We're not speaking about 1,500 vehicles in total. It should be at least 5,000. So basically, according to Oryx, almost the whole fucking losses that Ukrainians have had in 2.5 years of conflict. But that logistical feat it was already a problem in 2023 when the Russians didn't have the capabilities they have now. So yeah, that's it. The whole point is Ukraine's Kursk gambit is wearing thin, and it seems to indicate that Ukrainians are panicking. They're not as much panicking because it's the end of the war. They're panicking because they are not getting what they thought they would get, and they are not being there where they thought they would be. So the aid's not going to come. They know it. The positions they try to have within the Kursk Oblast, well, that failed as well. And generally speaking, now it's time to start thinking about leaving there with a bang. So it's, if possible, attacking Kursk Oblast or Kursk, nuclear reactor with whatever shit show they can send there. And embarrassing Putin one last time. And then slowly trying to contain as much as possible all the directions in South Donbass, in Zapo, and hope that whatever Americans are going to send as aid within the next 6 to 9 months, it would be enough for the Ukrainians to actually block the Russians from taking, as I said, Pokrovsk, but also executing all these tasks of expanding the front line from more or less Dobropila to Ulyapolye, because that's the end of this war. If the Russians have all these 2,000 square kilometer chunk, the war, militarily speaking, is not going to be lost, but the cost for Ukraine to incur to recover all this land, given how they performed last year, but also are performing right now, would be simply too high for any Ukrainian government to even think of. Of course, Zelejido is not like that. He has proven it by doing multiple bullshit things. So, in a certain sense, I think they will still have to be put into the ground. But once they're gonna start computing and calculating how much they were gonna need to liberate, as I said, all these parts that risk being lost within a certain term, then it's simple. They will try and go for a tactical ceasefire, uh, complete or localized. And okay, Zelensky has said as much apparently, but it's still gonna sting for Ukrainians once again if nothing changes. With an intervention from someone else, it could be far more interesting for Ukrainians, and maybe they could still have more than a hope to win. But the problem is not there. The problem is not the winning part. The problem is how they're going to do when it comes to recovering the ground. Because whatever we're saying here, Ukrainians will need to fight to get most of this land back if they try. And if they fail into these attempts, then you're going to have a completely different approach, which is now you're going to have a even more severe backlash than the failure last year, which started with the operation of Avdiivka and showed to the world that the counter had depleted a large part of the Ukrainian front and also a large part of the Ukrainian forces. So that's all that is to it. It was a more, general space. I'm still waiting for the conclusion of the Korenovo attack. So Lyubimivka needs to be taken back. Olgovka needs to be liberated. I mean, the second perimeter post Korenovo needs to be liberated, and then we can speak about more the way it's going to go for the Ukrainians. But right now, what we are seeing, especially in Kursk, is that they might have overextended themselves, and they might also have overplayed themselves in Kursk. As per Pokrovsk, you can see it every single day. We are going towards what was said, extension of the front line around Pokrovsk, impact towards multiple cities, Selidovo, Mirnograd, Pokrovsk, Dobropila, and a drop towards the southern sector, which means, of course, once again, that the risk of this huge line from Ugledar, Zotaniva, Kurakovo, Irnik, and then Pokrovsk is real, and that changes the whole point of view of the Ukrainian military, because right now then they're going to have a straight line front where the Russians may choose to attack from wherever they want, and that straight line front also passes by most of the topographic feature points of the area, which means that the Ukrainians are going to be at a disadvantage. Plus, most important part, once this whole front is flattened and Pokrovsk is into a danger of encirclement and being taken, the E50 would play oversized role. That's why also the Russians, instead of rushing head down towards Pokrovsk, are now flattening and seizing the areas around the E50 towards Selidovo, because that allows them to literally shoot straight into the system most of the supply lines from Donetsk to Pokrovsk. And this, as I said, this is going to change so much when it comes to the pursuit of the offensive actions, that, as I said at the beginning, for people who are in the space, Zelensky, by attacking Kursk, accepted that he cannot do it in Donbass. So it's just going to be a rubber stamp on a decision that, in my opinion, it has already been made the moment when Kursk started. Thank you very much for being here, guys. It was a bit more fluctuating, more confused today. But as I said, I just wanted to put a couple of things and put more of a reflection, because for the rest of it, everything has been said, everything has been written, and it makes no sense to start, rehashing the same shit. The point is to, put something out there, and people judge us at the Team Criminal for what happened and our analysis more than the flip flopping, the sit repping, all this bullshit. All that parts are very, very important because they validate or not according to how, of course, efficient and truthful those reports are. But the point is, as I said, once again, we put out our thoughts, our vision, and it works, it doesn't work, it goes along the reality or not. You be the judge. At the end of the day, this doesn't matter. That we yap left or right, Ukraine and Russia will keep fighting for a long time. Thank you very much, guys. If you have questions, if you want to intervene, it's up to you. Thank you very much. Okay. Once again, I'm sorry. Then I know that when I stop this and I say you can contribute and nobody wants to go forward, it's not a problem. I don't have a real issue with that. I would like once again to thank you very much. Would like to also to thank the guys from the team for facilitating the narrative. Although today it was more of a monologue at some points regarding Europe and vision for the future. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the same thing, because in fact history is not circular but has patterns, and the pattern right now is extremely discomforting for us generally. We the Balkans will laugh. I mean, people in the group that are from the Balkans, they know I laugh about it, and like I'm not afraid of it, but it's discomforting because there is no vision anymore. It's one of those things that Europe has never lacked, but the last couple of years have shown to me that there is no more vision with us. We have grown too accustomed, too comfortable. Never mind which country it is. It could be Moldova, it could be France. Um, we are going really very deep into that panis and circenses bullshit, and it is what it is. Okay, guys, thank you very much for everything, and there's going to be another one, a far more tactical approach for the post-Ugledar area in exactly, it's going to be on Thursday. Guys, stay safe, have a nice day. Thank you very much for being here. Bye.